If you've played Street Fighter 6, you probably know Luke. Luke is Capcom's attempt to create a new face for the franchise. He's the lovable goofball who acts as your trainer at the start of World Tour. A positive guy who just wants you to be your best self. But who actually is Luke? As someone who doesn't usually touch offline modes in fighting games, I'd heard vaguely that he worked for a PMC. This always struck me as weird. Was Luke in a private army? Luke may seem harmless, but behind that smile there's more than meets the eye. Although he tries to present as an upbeat guy, there's a darker side to Luke. I'm not usually a story person, and I didn't know much about Luke before researching this video. All I knew was that he was in a PMC, something which seemed at odds with the way he's portrayed in the game. I decided to figure out who Luke Sullivan actually is. It turns out what I found was pretty dark. Despite how he's presented, Luke isn't really a heroic figure at all. Street Fighter's story being what it is, there's a lot of gaps in Luke's backstory. Throughout the course of this video, in the top right corner I'll be giving the source for whatever I'm saying. There's going to be some speculation and reading between the lines. I'll indicate when I'm speculating as well. My sources for this video will be Street Fighter 5 and 6, as well as Days of the Eclipse, the Street Fighter 6 prequel comic. All of these sources are canon. The events of the comic are referenced in Street Fighter 6, which confirms its legitimacy. As a child, Luke was in a terrorist attack. The terrorists planted an IED in a mall. Luke's father managed to evacuate and save the bystanders, but ultimately died in the explosion. Luke, traumatized, pledged to fight against terrorism and ended up joining the US Special Forces. Luke eventually decided the army wasn't for him. The military was not providing the release he truly needed. Despite Luke's efforts, he was still haunted by the terrorist attack. With Colonel Guile's guidance, Luke ultimately decided to leave the military. Luke went off to find his own way and fight his own fight, aspiring to be a hero like his father. At some point later, Luke joins up with the PMC, Kaplan Protection Services. The exact time gap between Street Fighter 5 and 6 is vague, but it's long enough that Luke has risen to a senior rank within the company. Days of the Eclipse gives us a glimpse of Luke's life working for the PMC. He's doing a mission in Neyshal, working on behalf of a few different interests. He's working for Terra Network partners, the Neyshal government, as well as Ken Masters Foundation. As we'll get to later in the comic, Luke has been dealing with political protesters in Neyshal. He refers to these protesters as troublemakers. It's implied that he's had clashes with them in the past. The comic mostly focuses on Ken. He's putting on a fighting tournament to help the developing nation, but he's also involved in something to do with cryptocurrency and microinsurance. The comic is vague about what that means. Luke's job is to act as Mel Masters' bodyguard. Mel is the son of Ken, although their relationship is strained. The other company I mentioned, TNP, is an NGO run by a man named Johan Petrovic. This obviously turns out to be JP, so I'm just going to call him that because it's shorter. Luke's PMC work brings him into contact with some shady characters. There aren't many legitimate reasons for a government to need a private army, and Kaplan doesn't seem to vet their clients particularly well. Luke's involvement in Neyshal is vague, but he does claim to be in charge of the whole operation. The tournament has been drawing protests, and it's implied that Luke has been personally involved in cracking down on them. The protesters are shown throwing rocks at Ken's car, and there's even gunfire. There's clearly been violence and escalation on both sides here. The protesters aren't given much attention in the comic, but it's hard to imagine they don't have some good arguments against Ken and JP's plans. As we'll soon learn, there's some serious corruption going on and the Neyshal government are directly involved. It's also revealed that JP is acting as a policy advisor to the government. Let's take a step back for a second. Kaplan, the PMC, are being hired by corrupt businessmen and the government of a nation. There are protests against what's happening, which are being met with resistance from a private army. That private army is led by none other than Luke, the goofball we see on the cover of Street Fighter 6. In the comic, Luke sticks to his goofy personality from the game. It seems like he doesn't consider the implications of what he's doing or who he's working for. When Luke said he wanted to be a hero like his father, silencing protesters wasn't what came to my mind. The plot thickens when Amnesia, a hacktivist resistance movement, leak footage of Ken admitting to destabilizing the country. There's an alleged plot to fuel the protests from both sides and then use cryptocurrency to commit fraud to benefit from the conflict. The video ends up being a deepfake. Predictably, JP is behind Amnesia. Can we take a moment to talk about this plot? A hacktivist group taking down a tech billionaire crypto bro using deepfakes. This isn't what I expected from the Street Fighter 6 prequel comic. The plot of this game is absolutely unhinged. Deepfake or not, Luke is working for the Neyshal government and JP's company, not for the Masters Foundation. Luke's PMC is enabling this corruption. when JP condemns Ken for being a terrorist, Luke doesn't skip a beat authorizing the use of lethal force. He even stops protecting Mel, which leads to him being captured. Of course, Luke is just working for his client. He's a mercenary who will do anything for the highest bidder. He does believe Ken is a terrorist, but it's not his place to be dispensing vigilante justice. The allegations against Ken should be handled by an actual police force. This is already happening in the comic. Chun-Li is on the scene on behalf of Interpol. Luke never attempts to coordinate with law enforcement, instead taking matters into his own hands. Now, to Luke's credit, when JP's drones turn into IEDs, he does try to save the civilians. Regardless, I can't help but feel that he's partly responsible for this whole situation. After all, it's Luke's PMC that enabled JP's operation. I suspect Luke doesn't question his clients. He may be ignorant of the work he's doing, but he's still complicit. Luke spends the rest of the comic going after Ken, ultimately fighting him and losing. Luke doesn't find out that JP was behind amnesia or that the video was a deepfake. Ken tries to explain, but Luke isn't interested. He's clouded by rage. To Luke, Ken is another terrorist, like the one that killed his father. By fighting Ken, Luke is trying to avenge his father. This is Luke's backstory prior to Street Fighter 6. Traumatized by his dad's death, he joined the army but ultimately left to become a mercenary. As a PMC, he helped a corrupt businessman infiltrate the Nashao government and ignite a local conflict for profit. It's hard to see him as a hero in this story. Luke may mean well, but his inability to question orders combined with his deep-seated trauma lead to him doing more harm than good. Now on to Street Fighter 6's story. Luke has been street fighting on the side of his PMC work. He wants to meet people who live and fight by their own terms. Luke mentions that he spent his childhood getting into back alley brawls. Although you could read this as him acting out because of trauma, I think it's just part of the Street Fighter universe. Everyone seems obsessed with martial arts, and street fights are common. A kid looking for fights in back alleys might just be normal behaviour in this world. In Guile's story, Luke reveals that he believes Ken to be innocent. It seems like Luke's anger about the whole situation has subsided. He speaks about it calmly and at no point in the story seems interested in going after the terrorists. Instead, Luke has started training other fighters, acting as a mentor to the player character in the World Tour mode. Despite being a big part of the prequel comic, Luke doesn't have a whole lot of story in the game. He does seem more chilled out now. Perhaps his positive outlook is indicative of him coming to terms with his father's death and putting the trauma behind him. Despite that, there's still a few questions left. Firstly, it's revealed in Ryu's story that Luke doesn't fight for any particular purpose. This is eerily similar to Akuma's motivation, trying to find the strongest fighter they can to see if they can beat them. Secondly, it still seems that Luke isn't over his traumatic past. While he does maintain an upbeat personality through the story, the mask slips during his CA. Luke brutally pummels his opponent into the ground. When they try to guard, he overpowers them and punches their face hard enough to leave a crater. It's a particularly brutal move. Although his regular level 3 animation is similar, at the end of that he asks the opponent if they're okay. At the end of his CA, he shows no such care, instead saying, "Now stay down." Luke is an odd character. As the mascot of the game, you'd expect a hero. In reality, his work is morally grey at least and abhorrent at worst. While he does show his lighter side as a coach and mentor to the player, he also has some darker elements to his character. Luke is a mercenary for hire, a high-ranking member of a private military company who fights for whichever client pays the highest. At the same time, he does seem to have a positive outlet acting as a coach for young fighters. I'm interested to see what direction they take him in the future. I'm not usually a big story guy. I started this video because I found Luke's involvement in a PMC at odds with his character. As I kept digging, I found his story to be far crazier than I expected. I don't think I'll ever look at Luke the same way. Intentional or not, this lovable goofball is responsible for a lot of misery. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. I'll be back with my regular tutorial-focused content soon.